Shalom, children. Jacob has had a long life. He had 12 sons, but one son, Joseph, was his favorite child. Many years have passed, and Jacob's family have finally settled down in their new home. Joseph was now 17, and the older brothers had become good shepherds and farmers. Joseph's brothers did something behind their father's back, and Joseph went to his father and told him. The brothers were not happy. Then Jacob made Joseph a long robe. Now, back then, you couldn't just go to the store and buy a robe. Each garment had to be made, and it took a long time. So the brothers knew how much more their father loved Joseph, and this made them very jealous. Joseph didn't seem to notice all these bad feelings his brothers had against him. He had a dream, and he told them all about it. In his dream, they were all together binding sheaves. Do you know what that means? It's when you get many stalks of grain and tie them up into a bundle. Joseph said, "My sheaf rose up and was standing, and all your sheaves stood around me and bowed down." Now his brothers were really mad at him, since Joseph's dream seemed to imply that he would be king over them. Joseph had another dream and told the family about it. In this dream, he was standing there whilst the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to him. Now Jacob was not happy about this, and asked him if he meant for him and his mother and brothers to bow down to him. Oh boy, the brothers were really angry now. But Jacob didn't get angry at Joseph. He just put it to the back of his mind. Time passed, and Joseph's brothers were sent by their father to feed the sheep in Shechem. Jacob wanted to make sure they were doing okay, so he called Joseph and asked him to go and check on the brothers. The brothers saw him before he saw them, and they remembered how angry he had made them. They started calling him names before he even got to them. They called him Master of Dreams. They started thinking of ways to hurt him. They began to make fun of him and asked one another how his dreams were going to come true if he was hurt badly. The oldest brother, Reuben, heard them plotting and ordered them not to hurt him, but to throw him into an empty pit that was nearby. Reuben was planning to rescue him out of the pit later and sneak him back home. When Joseph arrived, they attacked him. They took off his long robe and threw him into the pit. Whilst the brothers were sitting down to eat, they saw a group of traders coming with camels. One of the brothers, Judah, had an idea. He said, "Let's make some money. We can sell Joseph, then we won't get into trouble for hurting him." So when the traders got there, they sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. The traders then took Joseph with them down to Mitzrayim. Now Reuben had been gone for a while, so when he went to sneak Joseph out of the pit, he discovered that Joseph was gone. Reuben was terribly upset. He didn't know how he would explain all of it to his father when he found out. So the brothers came up with another idea. Those brothers sure are full of ideas. They decided that they would pretend to have found Joseph's robe covered in blood and let their father imagine what had happened. So they took Joseph's robe and put animal's blood onto it. They took it to their father and asked him if he recognized it. Jacob was very sad because he concluded that Joseph must have been attacked by wild animals and died. Meanwhile, the traders who had bought Joseph sold him to an important Egyptian man in the land of Mitzrayim. This was where people worshipped the sun, a bull, and many other strange gods. How sad Joseph must have been. Do you think Joseph was afraid at being taken away to a strange place and wondering if he'd ever see his family again? In Mitzrayim, the name of the king was Pharaoh. Pharaoh had a man who was in charge of all the soldiers. This officer's name was Potiphar. Potiphar bought Joseph from the slave traders and took him to his house to work for him. Soon, Potiphar noticed what a hard worker young Joseph was. He was very smart too. In fact, Joseph was so good at everything that Potiphar decided to put him in charge of running the whole household and all his property. Everything seemed to be going well for Joseph. But something was going on behind the scenes that made Joseph quite nervous. You see, Potiphar had a wife who had noticed how smart and handsome Joseph was. Now Potiphar wasn't home very much, and Potiphar's wife may have felt lonely. But along came Joseph, who was always right there taking care of the household. So she decided to act unfaithful to her husband and ran after this handsome slave. Day after day, she tried to convince him to pay her special attention. Now, what do you think Joseph said? Did he say yes to her or no? He kept telling her a great big no. Joseph turned away from her, telling her how Potiphar trusted him completely, and because she was Potiphar's wife, it would be a very evil thing to do to go behind Potiphar's back. But more than anything, Joseph said no because it would be wrong in the eyes of Yahweh his Elohim. One day her patience ran out. When Joseph once again said no to her and tried to run away, she pulled off his outer clothing and held on to it. She showed it to her husband. Now we know she had made the story up, but just imagine how shocked and angry Potiphar was to think that Joseph had done something bad behind his back. So he had his servants take Joseph to the Pharaoh's prison. Joseph sat there in a dark, filthy jail cell, worse off than ever. Do you think he might have cried himself to sleep that night? I know I would. But after a little while, Joseph remembered that Yahweh was with him. He cheered himself up and decided to make the best of it, hoping to see what Yahweh would do to rescue him. The prison warden soon noticed how helpful and useful Joseph was. He was not like the other prisoners. Once again, Joseph was placed in charge of something big. This time, it was the whole prison. Yahweh was with him, blessed him, and took care of him. Some years went by when two of Pharaoh's most important servants were arrested and thrown into the palace prison where Joseph was. The first prisoner was Pharaoh's baker. The second prisoner was Pharaoh's cupbearer, which was a very important position. Whenever Pharaoh asked for wine to drink, his cupbearer had to taste it first to make sure there was no poison in it. If there was, then it would be the cupbearer who got sick and died instead of the Pharaoh. Now these two men were worried what Pharaoh might do to them. Joseph tried to make them as comfortable as he could. One morning, Joseph entered their cell to see what they might want for breakfast. But there they both sat, sad as could be and not at all hungry. They each explained that they had had very clear dreams that night. But try as they may, they could not figure out the meaning of it at all. Well, Joseph knew that Yahweh could show what dreams mean, so he asked them to share with him exactly what they had dreamt. The cupbearer spoke of seeing a grapevine with 3 branches. These blossomed and bore grapes. In the dream, he squeezed the grapes so that the juice ran into Pharaoh's cup, and then he presented the cup to Pharaoh. Joseph said it meant that in 3 days, Pharaoh would restore him to his place as cupbearer. Joseph added, "When you are restored to Pharaoh's service, please remember me and show kindness. For if you mention me to Pharaoh, maybe he will let me out of this jail because I've done nothing wrong." Then the baker shared his dream. He had seen 3 white baskets balanced on his head. The top one contained all kinds of delicious baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds were coming down to feed themselves out of the basket. Oh dear, Joseph was frowning. This dream predicted that Pharaoh would not pardon the baker, but in 3 days he would have him hanged instead. And that is exactly what happened. 3 days later, the cupbearer was lifted up and restored to his place, whilst the baker was put to death. Back in the prison, Joseph went about his work, hoping the cupbearer would tell Pharaoh about him. Maybe soon he would be released. But sadly, the weeks dragged by, turning into months and months. There was only one thing to do: to keep on trusting Yahweh, to fulfill the dreams that were given to him so long ago. Well, children, we have come to the end of our story for today. So we will see you next time for another exciting Torah portion. Shalom.